Hi, this is Vanessa Van Alstyne, and you're listening to Art, I swear. And today I have discovered something really exciting on the street corner. It's a co-host. Woohoo! Wasn't everybody wanting a co-host? And the co-host is an art history major by the name of...
Katie Gibbs.
Katie Gibbs, I don't know what you wanted to go by. That was the magical musical stylings of Katie Gibbs' cell phone. So your focus in art history was more on pre-Columbian art, so...
Pre-Columbian, Native American, and Spanish colonialism.
So we might bring some of that in, but for now we're going to confuse and befuddle her with our chosen topic by our fans, which is Surrealism! Ooh. And if you're like most people, you're probably going, is that Dali guy in the melting clocks?
It is the Dali guy in the melting clocks.
It's the Dali guy in the melting. And let's just kind of get the melting clocks out of the way. It's called The Persistence of Memory. Everybody has seen it. It was much parodied on Looney Tunes when those were still on the air. I think Pepe Le Pew hung out in it. And
oh yeah, I think there was a Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote bit, because that's what they do.
That's what they do. And a lot of those guys came from studio art and then went into cartooning because, well, cartooning really wasn't a thing before they were like the magical cartoon guys. Surrealism comes out of a previous podcast topic that was Dada. I would like to think of surrealism as Dada's Pokemon morph, like you know, you got your... I never actually played Pokemon, but you have your, like, Squirtle thing, and then it turns into Super Squirtle, and then you can, like, battle super great. So that's what I think Pokemon is.
I think it's Charmander to Charizard to Char-Megasaur is gonna eat your ass. Roughly.
Okay.
But from what I understand, Dadaism, the fall of Dadaism came because it became too structured. And the artists who were into Dadaism were like, we have too much structure here, we need something new. And then Surrealism was born, which was more structured.
It already existed when painters and sculptors started to kind of embrace it. If you look at the poetry of Andre Breton, he had a group of poets that were hanging out together. They're influenced by people like... Charles Baudelaire, Arthur Rimbaud. I should actually probably let you handle the French names, because you can actually pronounce them.
You know, you say stuff like that. Charles Baudelaire, Arthur Rimbaud, Isidore Ducasse, and who is also known as Comte de l'Entremont. Is that about...
That sounds a lot better than my bad West Texas version of it.
Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing about Breton and the poets is at first they're kind of like, I don't know about these painting guys. They're kind of working from that like Hugo Ball cut-up style where they're disassociating and they're using like this very loose, fast imagery, and they weren't sure that could translate into a still medium like painting or sculpture. A lot of that came out of Sigmund Freud's interpretation of dreams from 1899. It's a reference to something called automatism, which is the idea that the dysfunctional id kind of like sits in there, the subconscious, and that you can get in touch with it and create these free-flowing ideas that have both a like symbolic and mythological meaning, but at the same time have this like kind of insane no meaning. So we're kind of playing with that idea that like Dada is nothing and surrealism is a new kind of nothing that's also a little bit of something, if that makes sense. And it's kind of not supposed to.
And that little bit of something is fully from your subconscious. That is not something that exists in reality, because your subconscious is truer, whereas reality could be anything you want to impose upon it.
And that he eventually even starts to kind of cause a schism in surrealism. But before we go there, I would like to pause and back up and talk about an artist who actually has a huge influence on surrealism. It's somebody like you might have heard of, and you've probably seen references to his work, but not a lot of people know his name, and it's Giorgio de Chirico. And de Chirico was actually a Greek man that later moved to Italy. He was very involved in the Futurist movement, which was the Italian version of kind of the Dada people, except they were more interested in building cities of light and advancing humanity than they were just kind of deconstructing things into nothing.
I will say that if you have a chance, just look up that name real quick. And the works that you see, you've seen them before. They're these giant monumental... It looks like a monumental painting, and I can't give you the dimensions off the top of my head, but the architecture is just fantastic and surreal, but the proportions are way off from what you would normally think.
It's funny, I've actually seen a couple. If you're ever in Houston, the Manil collection has a wonderful surrealist collection. It's never all out at one time because they have so much of it, and they own a bunch of objects that these guys referenced for their artwork, which is neat to look at the same time. Dikirikos are actually really tiny.
Are they? It's monumental to see them.
Because there's the presence of a lot of sculpture and old world items.
Architecture and such, and then, yeah, even the old world sculpture that you can see in there. And it's the way it's juxtaposed in the entire painting. It's really fantastic. So you should really take a look at it to understand where we're going with this.
You know, and I'll say about people like Dikiriko, if you think about it, he comes from Greece and Italy, which is the cradle of Western civilization. How are you going to be a creative and step away from that loaded past? And another thing I want to mention about his work that becomes very relevant to the Surrealists is a lot of the sculptures early in his work is a sleeping figure that's Mnemosyne, who is a Greek mythological figure that is the mother of the muses, and she's also like the goddess of like memory. So when you think back to that Salvidor Dali we already referenced, that's actually titled The Persistence of Memory. And if you think about what they're doing is they're playing with memory itself. If anything, a dream is a kind of a disturbed and broken memory. I've never read Freud's book on dream analysis, but...
Sorry, you lost me at Freud.
A lot of his stuff is kind of seen as quackery or dangerous. But at the time, it's really, really stylish to go and get yourself psychoanalyzed. You want to...
Right, sit down, sit on the couch, talk about your dreams. What are you thinking of?
Tell me about your mother. Tell me that same story about your mother. What is it about your mother that made you this messed up way? And, you know, I'm not hung up on my mother. I'm Sigmund Freud.
Right. Now, do you think that your relationship with your mother has impacted your entire life? Because it has mine, but that's not what we're talking about right now because I'm Freud. So, but I think what the Surrealists latched onto with Freud was, again, that unconscious imagery and that unconscious truth that they were trying to find. The Surrealists were going from post-World War I all the way through World War II, so they're dealing with some really harsh reality. They're dealing with war, they're dealing with famine, they're dealing with post-war depression. That's the reality that they were living in, so it makes sense to try to embrace an alternate reality, if you will.
And Surrealism does continue after World War II, but what happens with a lot of the artists we've discussed from this period with World War II is that they're suddenly faced with the fact that the Germans see them as degenerates, a lot of them are Jewish, or a lot of them come from backgrounds that are not ideal. And if you're having a political revolution, you really want to oust the artists that aren't working for you because you want the good propaganda guys that are going to make you look great.
Well, and
Hitler failed out of art school, so he was a little bitter.
He was a big watercolor fan. So.
Yeah, he liked classicism.
And anything that didn't fit in that style was therefore degenerative art.
Yeah. But that's actually when we talk... And I should probably do a podcast on Dikiriko, but when we talk about Dikiriko, he actually can stay in Italy. Mussolini really did not care about the arts as much. You kind of had to pay tongue, or you kind of had to pay tongue.
I pay with my tongue.
I paid with my tongue. Yeah. You kind of had to pay homage to the greatness that was El Duce, but, you know... These guys still were pretty subversive, though Dikiriko does kind of like sell out later in his life. You don't see a lot of his later paintings because they're very, very kitschy.
It happens because at some point you're gonna need to put food on the table.
Well, I don't even think that was that for him. I think it was his values changed and the art world didn't like where his values were going. It's easy to sell somebody that's like the underdog revolutionary, but it's not as easy to sell the old man that's discovered he likes pretty girls and flowers. So if we're discussing major figures in Surrealism, of course we've already mentioned Salvidor Dali. That's Mr. Mustache.
That's going to be one of your major components there.
Yeah, he's got the like creepy long-legged like animal paintings and the melting clocks and lots of phallic references. Like I get requests to cover Dali. To say the man was a pervert is an understatement, and it's really hard not to talk about his work without talking about that. I think kind of like Andy Warhol and Louise Nevelson, a big part of Dali was that larger than life personality.
And he lived that personality.
Yeah, no, that's not an understatement at all. There was articles written after he died about how he was like the world's most horrible invalid.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I don't even want to. So if you're going to request Dali again, like if you want to hear that real in depth, I want you to really think about that. Like, do you really want to?
Do you really want to embrace that? Because talking about surrealism as a whole is one thing, but embracing Dali is going down the rabbit hole, my friends.
And you're talking about somebody that for creativity embraced madness. I mean,
And Khalo.
And yeah, well, I'm not going to go there, but sort of. But that is something to point out, that kind of fleeing Europe from the war because he was such a nutbag and, you know, an artful degenerate, according to Hitler. He does end up in Mexico with Breton for a while, and that creates a group of surrealists in Mexico that are very famous, like Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo. They were already flirting with it, but having those men actually come there is a big influence on them. And really, like, Mexican surrealism just needs to be its own podcast because it's way more political than European.
Yes, and we're from Texas, so the politics are very strong here.
Yeah, we're very aware of Mexican politics. God bless Mexico. Anyways.
Viva la revolucion.
Diego Rivera would high five you for that. He'd be like right on in Spanish, which I don't speak.
Lo siento.
Oh, good.
You brought me on for a reason.
I know, right? The next one we'll talk about is Rene Marguerite, which is how I've always said it.
Magritte?
Marguerite, probably, if you speak the Frenches. And that's the guy, if you know the painting of the dude hanging in space with buildings behind them and like an apple right in front of his head. There's another famous one where like these two people are kissing and they kind of have a sheet wrapped around his head. And he's still working in kind of the automatic way that Dali is, but his stuff is much more subtle. It's emptier, a little bit more like de Chirico's work. He plays with like the principles and elements of art. Probably his breakaway painting for surrealism is the pipe that says this is not a pipe in French. And it's that's called a trompe-l'oeil.
Yeah, it's a you had it right that time. That's a trompe-l'oeil. Well played, but it's a trick of the eye.
Yeah, sometimes I can English good. And trompe-l'oeils were a history of painting that were these objects that looked so realistic that it looked like you could touch them, but, you know, they weren't actually there. And this predates, and that's one of the differences you see when you look at, like, Dali versus Marguerite, is Dali's got this very, like, heavy classicism style where everything's very piled on and thick.
It's very busy and it's loaded with symbolism.
It's way more referential. That's a great point. Marguerite, it's kind of more like just a simple, beautiful dream.
It's aesthetically pleasing because you're not allowed to say things like it's pretty, but it is very simple. But the appeal to Magritte is it allows you, the viewer, to see the unconscious that he is seeing, and it allows you to be on the same playing field as the artist himself with the simplicity that he brings to the work of art.
You're so smart.
I done got my degree for a reason.
And there are a lot of bleed over artists from Dada. Last episode we talked a good bit about Marcel Duchamp. He's very important to surrealism. He's just kind of off in New York doing his own thing at this point. He does come back to Paris eventually.
He's the upside down urinal.
And the nude descending a staircase. And then there's Man Ray, who's very important to photography, and he produces some of the quintessential surrealist films that everybody has to watch ad nauseum in art school.
I circumvented that. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's
That's what you get when you major in pre-Columbian is you look at pot shards and then you look at textiles, and then when you're bored of pot shards and textiles, you know what you look at? Pot shards and textiles.
yeah, and well, maybe sometimes a rock with something carved into it.
It falls under pot shards.
Oh, okay. I don't know a lot about the archaeological end of this stuff. I do know a lot of the artists we're talking about. Since their works had a great deal of value, the Nazis did not destroy them. However, they did take them from prominent collectors, especially if they were Jewish, and pawn them off. And you'll occasionally go into a museum and find one of these or things from similar periods with a place marker saying they're being investigated, because there's a feeling that those families deserve to have their wealth returned to them when that is possible.
Agreed, and it also destroys the provenance, because if you can't track down who it's from, then you start to lose who the actual artist was. You start to lose all these things in the less famous works of art that is actually intrinsically important to the history of the piece itself.
That's actually a huge problem with De Chirico. He got in a pissing battle with this man named Dakara, who was claiming that he was the father of futurism, and De Chirico's like, no, it's me. And to prove his point, he backdated a bunch of his paintings. So there's kind of this problem with like, well, what is totally real with this guy? And then Kara went and did the same thing, and then they kind of like switch each other's work out. And
so it's kind of like taking your car and putting it in reverse and putting it up on the blocks and just hitting the gas pedal for a while. Is what we're saying.
To knock down the odometer like
yeah.
in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Or it's like taking the Ford symbol off of your Honda and shoving it on your Honda and then putting the Ford symbol back on their car and being like, see, I invented the Honda blah, blah, blah. It was a Ford first. One of the artists I did briefly mention in the Dada podcast is Max Ernst, who is one of the prominent teachers in the Bauhaus. He really did embrace Surrealism after Dada, and a lot of his works, they're interesting. It's still kind of along the same vein as Dali. His wife, however...
Dorothea Tanning?
Yes, and she's an American. They get married in the 40s after kind of meeting. She was an existing artist. Unfortunately, a lot of the dialogue about her doesn't really pick up until Ernst shows up, but his initial interest in her is that she was this American that was already making surrealist art. One of the paintings that caught his eye was called Birthday. On her 30th birthday, she did this surrealist painting of herself where, like, her outfit are these, like, dripping bodies, and you can kind of see the age that's starting to kick in, and the room she's in has that, like, ethereal, like, otherworldly dreamscape. And she outlives him by quite a bit. She was younger, but not that much younger. She even did some, like, cloth pieces that were really influential on me in art school. And it kind of has that... Frida Khalo reference back to, my roles and experience as a woman in these dreamscapes without, like, what I feel like is the heavy-handedness of Frida Kahlo. But you have to realize they also come from two very different cultures.
They do, and Frida Kahlo also has the weight of those fantastic eyebrows.
Yeah, those eyebrows, that has to, like, sit heavy on your thoughts. They're like a bird perch of, like, I really think I'm thinking about plucking these things, but then they're me. They're, like, iconically me. Like, there's a movie that came out recently that
Selma Hayek. I just killed Vanessa.
No, there's a movie that came out recently that's called, like, He's Back or something like that, and it's about Hitler. And it's hilarious. Like, Hitler shows up in modern Germany and they think he's a comedian. But the book is just, like, his hair with, like, that little mustache, and that's the words. I feel like you could do that for Salvidor Dali, and it would be, like, just some black hair and, like, that ridiculous mustache. But you could also do that for Frida Kahlo, and it would just be some eyebrows with words on them and that, like, bun thing she always wore.
True story. For the role in Frida, Selma Hayek, who played Frida, wanted to get the natural eyebrows, so she started shaving between her eyebrows to get the hair to grow in naturally, and it worked, and so now she has a unibrow.
I want to know now, like, did Frida Kahlo, like, shave that stuff? Was she, like,
That
you
was
know...
natural.
No, but, like, that squareness, was she, like, I really want to be more geometrical in my life, so, like, I'm going to just take a razor and, like, shoop and make sure these are, like, some, like, real strong edges?
I wouldn't put it past her.
I wouldn't put it past her
She was
either.
a little batshit.
She was a little cray.
A little bit.
Some of that was that car wreck, and then lots of dead babies, and
yeah.
then Louise Nevelson, and I think everybody slept with Diego Rivera. Like, as long as it had his, like, preferred genital type, he was like, yes, let's try that.
Yes, I shall try that now.
Yes, let's dip into this pool. But Frida, I still love you.
And she kept going back to him.
She kept going back. Yeah.
Surrealism, as it went on, broke down into two different archetypes. And you had the automatists and the veristic?
That works.
Right, and automatists tend to focus their work on more on what they're feeling, and they were less investigative. So it was kind of like automatic writing, and that was really one of the foundations.
Because that's what Britain's doing.
Yeah, so you could sit there and tap into whatever's in your subconscious without really thinking about it.
I know there's two methods that those guys did it. One is they would train themselves to go to sleep, and then you force yourself awake, and you'd either write what you were dreaming about or you'd sketch. Another one is a really fun party game, especially if you're blitzed, and kids under 21, please don't drink. we didn't. Shut up.
Or any other illicit material.
Yes, because your children may listen to this someday. We were good children.
I was a paragon of awesomeness.
But if you're really blitzed, take a piece of paper, fold it into 3 hidden sections, and you're going to play a game called Exquisite Corpse. So you draw the head first of what your exquisite corpse is going to look like, and of course you're a surrealist, so be loose with this. It can be a lobster, or it can be slightly phallic, or it can be your mom, or it can be your best friend, or it can be a cartoon dog, or it can be a butt. And then you kind of leave the lines of where, like, the shoulders would go down, and then you draw the middle, you hide it, you fold it up and hide it, then you draw the middle section, you, like, pass that to the person next to them, and you draw the middle section, because if you keep drawing it, that's really boring. And then they draw, like, you know, a chest of drawers, or a potato, or actual boobs, or, like, man boobs. And then you fold it, leaving the lines where the bottom part, and then they add that in. And it's, after you pass this around a couple of times, you share them and get ideas for your crazy surrealist painting. And that's part of also what leads into, like, the Black Dahlia murders, but that's a whole other podcast.
Oh, goodness. So, but back to the automatists, basically they thought that abstract art was the way to convey their surrealistic images, their subconscious, into art, basically, so that you could see it. And the veristic, bleh.
The V guys.
The veristic surrealists decided that there was actual meaning behind what you had in your subconscious. When you brought that forth, they were looking for metaphors, and they were looking for deeper meanings behind that, and they were looking for those Freudian
bombastic crap.
Right. So it's hard to pick one from the other, but basically when you boil it down to the nuts and bolts, your automatists would see art and the veristics would see meaning behind the art.
But what's funny is the veristics end up being a lot more abstract than the automatist, whereas you have the, like, very symbolism rich, thick, almost classical Dali paintings. These guys like Joan, Miro, and Paul Klee are these little fun broken down forms that are almost cartoony. It's much more about, like, gesture and color and what's the, like, basic imagery behind things. And they're actually, like some of the Dadaists and the Cubists, referencing, like, tribal art for this, like, core of what things are. And I will say Ernest eventually kind of starts to move a little more into this camp before he just goes, like, pure abstract.
Word. Sorry, my brain just died.
Word brain.
Word brain.
Word brain.
Word brain good.
Word brain. You do word brain good. That's why I wanted you on here.
Sweet.
A lot of the surrealists we're talking about that are in the
automatist
camp. They make these heavy war pieces and these, once again, kind of bombastic things. The V guys, the V boys, they end up making things that are a lot more fun. Like, Paul Klee is one of my favorite artists, and it's because I feel like if that dude and I had had a beer together, we would have giggled like little schoolgirls and just had a great day. When you look at his paintings, and Miro's too, and Miro's sculpture, because he did do a lot of that.
Right.
If you live in Dallas, the Nasher Sculpture Center has some great sculptures by Miro.
And it's free.
It's free now? No,
isn't
it's the Dallas Museum of Art that's free. Nasher is kind of expensive.
Oh, the Crow is free too.
The Crow is free as well.
Okay,
That's
sorry.
Asian art. It's
But
okay.
still, make a day of it. Go see DMA, go see the Crow, and go see Nasher, most definitely.
Yeah, Dallas-Fort Worth is very gifted to have some of the best art museums in the world, actually.
Fort Worth is better.
Yeah, Fort Worth is better, but we don't want to admit that about Cowtown.
I totally just did.
It's
I'll
Cowtown.
do it out loud too.
I would live in Cowtown if my husband's jobs didn't keep us stuck here. It's cheaper.
It is cheaper
And
and
it's
it's
like-
beautiful.
And it's like a big small town, whereas Dallas is like the most stuck-up city on the planet after LA. But guess where a lot of people from LA have moved?
Well, you know, it's rustic to live in Dallas.
And it's cheaper, gosh.
Gosh darn. Where are
Back
we
to
at?
surrealism. Well, we've kind of covered the dude guys that we were going to cover. And I would like to point out, which is great to me, like the Dadists, surrealists were a lot more open to women being involved in their work. This is not something that happens in a lot of art movements pre-1970s. And it's only because in the 1970s the women got hecka mad. Hecka.
That's what happens when you start setting your bras on fire and deciding that you want actual rights and pay for your work.
You know, some days I'm kind of cold and I'm just like, I got a bra and I got a lighter. Screw it.
I can just imagine your husband coming home to the bra outside aflame.
No, he's totally like, hey, let me take mine off. I'm cold too.
Oh, God. The moobs have it.
He's gonna slap me if he ever listens to one of these.
If it'll make you feel better, I'll tell you about my husband's third nipple.
And this has been the latest episode of Art, I Swear.
Art. I swear.
Creative shout out time.
Creative shout out time. This is a thing. I started back in the day because we've discussed my art history major. Apparently you have to do studio art when you do an art history major because you have to create the thing that you're going to write 20-page papers about for your undergrad. Let's
God.
just say that I am not the greatest artist in the world. I can write a paper, but I draw stick figures. And I ended up taking some classes at a local community college in sculpture to get this knocked off of my degree plan. And one of the girls I started out in this tiny little sculpture class was named Ruchi Gupta. And if you look up her work, she's in Charlotte, North Carolina, and her store is called Birds at Noon. It is actually fantastic, beautiful, intricate, detailed sculpture. And I love her style. I love the naturalism that she brings to it. She has just taken the sculpture ball and run with it. So if you get a chance, please go see her store, Birds at Noon. It's online, it's on Etsy, and she does local shows out there in North Carolina all the time. And I can't say enough about her. It's really freaking awesome work.
Art, I Swear would like to acknowledge Joe Giggs for our intro-outro podcast. If you're looking for a surreally good time in the New York City area, consider hiring the DJ Joe Giggs. Music samples provided by the Conant Project. Thanks, Conant Project. You guys are awesome. Check out their project with Iridile.